You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
Verse 6, I was on my way and drew near to Damascus about noon, and a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I answered, Who are you, Lord? And he said, I'm Jesus of Nazareth, whom you're persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And he said to me, Rise and go into Damascus, and there you'll be told all that's appointed for you to do.
Sometimes as Christians, the Lord will speak to us in unique ways, sometimes ways that other people don't understand or ways they might not believe. But our God is a powerful God who can perform wonders, just like Saul experienced with the great light. In today's message, Pastor Ken will share with you some great examples in the Bible about how the wonders of Jesus are proved through history. All the impossible miracles Jesus Christ performed throughout his lifetime here on earth are all true. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Daniel, chapter 10, as he begins his message, Let's Get Real.
Chapter 10, Daniel sees reality that we don't see. He sees the spiritual realm. He gets to encounter a reality that we only get hints of now and then. And we talked about it when we studied the unseen realm earlier in the year. But what we're going to see is some spiritual aspects of our physical world as we start looking at chapter 10, 11, and 12. That's all one vision. This is the last vision Daniel receives. But he gives us a lot of information coming into it in Daniel 10 to let us know that there's more to reality than just the physical reality that we see every day. So let me ask this question. As a believer, do you believe in the supernatural? I mean, we have to, right? Because if we don't believe in the supernatural, Jesus is born of a virgin, died on the cross, and rose from the dead. But for a lot of believers, that's usually where they stop. They believe some aspects of the supernatural. They don't believe all of it. The entire Bible is a supernatural book. And when you stop and think that the Holy Spirit superintended all the words that were written down using 40 different authors over 2,000 years, and everything fits together to the point that the book of Revelation, which is 220 verses, makes 800 references to the Old Testament, and it's not wrong in any of them. It's just amazing how all of that happens. But there's a lot more to it in terms of what supernatural and what the real world is like. And Daniel 10 to 12, being the final prophecy from Daniel, we're going to get a glimpse of that. We're going to see the future of Israel. He's going to give us a history of Israel from his current time to the future, which hasn't happened yet. But he's also going to give us a view of another world and something else that's going on at the same time. Daniel chapter 10 is the basic groundwork for the vision. It lays out how serious Daniel really was to get an answer from the Lord. Now remember, in chapter 8 and 9, and more with chapter 9, Daniel knows where he is in the stream of history. We've talked about that. He knows where he is in prophecy. He knows that, and we saw in chapter 9 that he was at the 67th year. He knew that the nation was going to be going back. He knew what the prophecy of Jeremiah was. It just wasn't happening the way he thought it would because he didn't have all of the different writings that he would be able to study and know them. He was only referencing one. So he knew, but there was a history for his people. He knew that. And in chapter 9, it led him to prayer. And now he's praying and he's adding fasting to it as a result of what happened. So Daniel chapter 10, verses 1 to 3. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. He wants to make sure we still know it's the same guy back in chapter 1. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict. And he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. So for 3 weeks, he didn't use deodorant, I guess. that means more than that, but that's the first thing that crosses my mind as I look at it. Now, you got to remember, Daniel now is in his mid-80s, probably about 85. And he was not part of the group in the first year of Cyrus that returned back to Israel. Now, remember, Cyrus, and we talked about the edicts and all of that last week, Cyrus made the edict for the people to go back and rebuild the temple. Well, they did. They went back and they started, and then there were some problems that came up as a result of that. We see some of that here in Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 to 11. The first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Remember, we talked about that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, and he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he's charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let each survivor in whatever place he sojourns be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, beside free will offerings for the house of God that's in Jerusalem. Then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go up and to rebuild the house of the Lord that's in Jerusalem, and all who were about them aided them with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, with beasts, and costly wares, besides all that was freely offered. And Cyrus the king brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. Cyrus the king of Persia brought these out in the charge of Mithredath, the treasurer, who counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And he gives you the accounting of it if you're interested in the numbers. And all of these Sheshbazzar brought up when the exiles were brought from Babylonia to Jerusalem. So they go to Jerusalem, they're ready to rebuild the temple, they're ready to get started, and now we're in the third year after that. So this is 2 years later. Daniel chapter 9 was actually in the first year of Cyrus as well, but now we're in the third year. Those who have returned have been there for a couple of years. Daniel's still part of the government. Now, why he didn't go back, it could be because he's a faithful servant of the government. They asked him to stay. Or maybe he can't travel 1,000 miles on donkey anymore. I don't know. I have no idea. But he's receiving the reports that come back. He sees the reports coming from Judah since he's in that role, and he's supervising these governors out in the boonies of the Persian government. So he knows what's going on, and he knows what Ezra chapter 3 talks about, where there's difficulties being encountered, and the work has actually been suspended, as it says in Ezra chapter 4. He knows this, and this is what's driving him to prayer. The thing he didn't understand, and we have to understand, is that the 70 years of captivity that expired with the return of the exiles in Ezra 1 did not fulfill the desolation of the city of Jerusalem and the temple. There's an additional 20 years that's going to have to take place, which is the difference between Jerusalem and Israel, and the first deportation of the Jews, which was 605 BC versus 586 BC. Everything was going great from God's point of view, but he was expecting everything to happen immediately. I mean, it's the same thing. When you take a look that Israel declared their independence in 1948, but they didn't have Jerusalem. Well, when did they get Jerusalem? 20 years later, 1967, when they were supposed to. It lined up with the desolations of Israel and Jerusalem again. It's really interesting how God does that. Okay, so now for 3 weeks, Daniel has been in a partial fast. He's not fasting entirely, but also Passover is going on at the same time. So he's fasting during Passover, which is kind of a daring thing in itself. He's really serious about getting an answer from the Lord. He understands that fasting doesn't necessarily mean he'll get an answer from the Lord, but he's really serious. He wants to know what God has for the nation of Israel. Now, he's at the Tigris River. He's been seeking the Lord for 3 weeks. And the time period that we're in here, he identifies, and we know exactly, it's 3 days after Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And this is when Daniel receives the vision. So we're in verse 4 of Daniel 10. On the 24th day, see, he's identifying it for us, of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen. This is what he sees. A man clothed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled and hid themselves. Sounds like something that happened to somebody else that we read about in the book of Acts, doesn't it? So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. And I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep with my face to the ground. So who is it that he sees? He sees this image, and immediately I start thinking of other appearances of this same person described in almost the same way. In the book of Revelation, chapter 1, John tells us who he sees in verse 13. In the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe with a golden sash around his chest. Okay. So far, we're describing the same person. The hairs of his head were white like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze. There it is again. Refined in the furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp two-edged sword, and his face was like the sun, shining in full strength. Do we have a hint as to maybe who Daniel's seeing now? Okay? Just getting an idea. Now, in Acts, there's somebody else who talks about this happening to him. Paul. In chapter 22, he's explaining what happened. Verse 6. I was on my way and drew near to Damascus about noon, and a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, Who are you, Lord? And he said, I'm Jesus of Nazareth, whom you're persecuting. Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And he said to me, Rise and go into Damascus, and there you'll be told all that's appointed for you to do. And since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, I was led by the hand of those who were with me and came into Damascus. Now, did you see the common thread in all of that? Light. In 2 of them, that we're getting a physical description that sounds very much the same. Okay? Believe it or not, commentators disagree as to whether it's Jesus or not. I have a problem understanding why it isn't Jesus. I think we're actually going to see 2 different beings here, and one is Jesus, the pre-incarnate Christ, and the other one is going to be an angel, we'll find out. But there is disagreement. Some say it's an angel. I don't agree with that. I think it's Jesus. The language used and the similarity to the description of John in Revelation 1 leads me to believe that this is who he's seeing. He's seeing Jesus here. This is a description, and he wants us to know, this is a description of a divine being, and because he's shiny and has all of divinity around him, it's something that a Jew would understand in 500 BC. It's something a pagan would understand in 500 BC. They all understand what he's seeing. They get it. But the hand that touches Daniel probably is not the same hand as the person that he's seeing, because the hand that touches him talks about needing a lifeline from Michael, and I don't think Jesus would need a lifeline from Michael. Okay? But still supernatural. Now, by the way, if you're going to throw off the supernatural, this is from D.L. Moody. I love it. In 1895. If you're going to throw off the supernatural, you might as well burn your Bible. You take the supernatural out, you've taken Jesus out, and you've taken the best part of the book, and there's not a whole lot left. You know, I mean, the supernatural is, everything in the Bible is supernatural. It just is. And then Dr. Schaeffer, who founded Dallas Seminary, says this: in God's universe, God is immanent and transcendent. The powers of nature are limited, but God is able to introduce unto infinity therein whatever he wills to do. His own works are manifest in creation and providence are hardly to be classed as miracles. They're the normal works of God in his own particular sphere of action. But what's natural with God is supernatural to man. Yeah, we don't get it. And what we see here, and what we're going to see here very quickly in chapter 10, is the supernatural coming in. The right context for understanding the Bible, and this is from Dr. Heiser, the right context, this is what we've been talking about, is to understand what it is that the people who are reading it understood, okay? It's simple, but it's not easy to understand. And he says that he's found that to be the problem. I have too. It's really tough sometimes to understand what they were thinking when they wrote it and what they were thinking when they're reading it and who the audience is, because I'm not from the 5th century BC. I'm from the 20th century AD, and I know what spaceflight is, and I've seen Star Wars multiple times, and I see some of these descriptions, and I go, dude, just read Star Wars, you know. We see things in the Scriptures, and we'll come into a bunch of it in Revelation, we'll see some of it in Zechariah too, that describe modern warfare, but they're trying to describe in 3rd century BC language and terminology things that we know as reality in the 21st century. We just know what it is. The biblical context includes supernaturalism. It just does. We have to understand that. The biblical writers believed in an active, animate, spiritual world. And if they believed it, we need to believe that too, okay? That world is home to a lot more than God the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and angels, and Satan, and demons. It also includes, Dr. Heiser calls them other gods. We've talked about that, other Elohim, beings that live in the supernatural realm, fallen divine beings. It includes them who they're demanding worship, so they're little g gods. It includes them. And it also includes territorial spiritual beings that are not demons. And we're going to see some of those. They're territorial, they don't leave, but they stay there, and they're connected with a particular nation. They're superior to demons, and we're going to see that as well. It included what we think of as ghosts who could appear visibly and physically and communicate to the embodied living world. 1 Samuel 28 shows that. For the biblical writers, divine beings could eat, drink, fight, and produce offspring with humans. Genesis 6. And that didn't end well. So, this is the context that these verses that we're about to get into now are from. It's a supernatural perspective. The problem that we have, our generation, is naturalistic. It just is. Francis Schaeffer, who's the one that pointed this out, there is a complete commitment to the concept of the uniformity of natural cause in a closed system. We have trouble understanding whether or not anything's supernatural. Francis Schaeffer said, modern man has a trouble with miracles and with supernatural. Just does. It's a distinguishing mark of our time. If we're not careful, even though we say we're biblical Christians and supernaturalists, the naturalism of our generation tends to come upon us. And it does. It sneaks in. It may infiltrate our thinking without recognizing it coming in, like a fog creeping through a window open only half an inch. And as soon as it happens, Christians began to lose the reality of their Christian life. The danger is we see the supernatural, we know it is, but as soon as the real world hits us, and that guy cuts you off on I-95, like they do me, all of a sudden it's not supernatural anymore. It becomes very physical. Okay, now in this section of chapter 10, where we're at, Daniel is going to have a conversation at the beginning of a vision that stretches to the end of the book. And when you read the conversation and you accept it at face value and you don't try to read something else into it, as multiple commentators do, there are some who look at it and say, scholars who look at it and say, this is what it says. That's very clear. And there are others who try to read into it because they reject the supernatural aspect of the Scriptures. I don't. Here at Calvary, we believe that the Bible is a supernatural book, and we're going to take what it says, okay? So Daniel just has a matter-of-fact experience, and he talks with a worldview that all the Jews of his era understood. They got it. Supernatural, not a problem. But we, being naturalists, as Francis Schaeffer was talking about, don't have this worldview until we have to unlearn it. Because we come to Christ, we realize it's a supernatural book, and we have to unlearn things as he starts teaching us the reality of the Word. And what happens is that many times we bypass scriptures like this, or we tend to allegorize it. But the conversation that we're going to listen in on is true, all of it. So let's pick up in verse 10. So Daniel has seen this, he's collapsed, and now he gets touched by a hand. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, this is not the same person he saw in the vision. Now he's talking to an angel. O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you. Here it again. They want him to understand what he's going to be said. And stand upright, for I've been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. Then he said, Fear not, Daniel, from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God. Your words have been heard, and I've come because of your words. Now remember, when Gabriel came last time, while Daniel was praying, Gabriel got the sign, go, and he went immediately. And Daniel even says, I see him coming. But he's been praying for 3 weeks. What's happened? Well, the enemy now knows that there's direct conversations and messages going to Daniel. And the enemy is going to stand in the way and try and prevent that from happening. And this divine being is telling Daniel this. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Who is that? Well, it's not a human. It's not someone here on planet Earth. This divine being has been sent by God to go talk to Daniel, and he has encountered something on the way in the supernatural, unseen realm, and he's been fighting a war for the last 3 weeks. There is a war going on right now. We can't see it. It's going on all around us. We see aspects of it from time to time, but there is a war going on, and we're going to get a glimpse of it here. So he's fighting for 3 weeks, and it says, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. Now, Michael's an archangel. You know, and every time I read about Michael, he's always doing something magnificent. He's doing this or he's doing that. I have visions of him with a sword that's about 20 feet tall and tats on both arms. And he's a big. You don't mess with an archangel. You just don't. He came to help me, and I was left there with the kings. Now it's plural. It's not singular. It was the prince of Persia. Now it's the kings of Persia. So once again, we have divine beings who are fallen, who are territorial, somehow connected with Persia, trying to stop this messenger from bringing his message to Daniel. And I was left there with the kings of Persia, Michael helps, and came to make you understand what's to happen to your people in the latter days. That's a technical term. Every time you see that in the Bible, latter days, think end of the age. Okay? That's what he's talking about. For the vision is for days yet to come. Daniel records that in his extremity, he gets touched by a hand. If the original vision was a theophany, this is someone else. It just is. It is not the same being. So, Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. We once again see that God, and this is the viewpoint of the people of the time period that Daniel's talking about. This is their viewpoint. They had a very specific view and a very specific viewpoint in regards to their time period that they were living in. Daniel records that, and he withstood him for 21 days, but we also know that Bible scholars are in unanimous agreement that the princes that are referred to in Daniel 10 are divine beings. They're not humans. There is no disagreement amongst the scholars on that. They do not call them humans. The term that is used there is also the same term that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians. When you take a look at what it says in the Septuagint, the same term is used when it says princes. So that means when you go to 1 Corinthians and he's talking about these princes, if they had known that Jesus was going to rise from the dead, they wouldn't have crucified him. He's not talking about earthly princes. He's talking about these same supernatural beings.
You've been listening to a message about the inspiring book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Pastor Ken has been diving deep into this book here on the Unsafe Bible. Something that stands out repeatedly is that Daniel went through many trials by fire, showing his faith in the midst of being in exile and an enemy to those who didn't fear God. But every time God came through for him, proving that standing up for your faith brings honor and blessings that can't be attained by the ways of this world. Have you had situations like Daniel's, where you've gotten in trouble for proclaiming Jesus as your Savior? The cost of worldly demise is worth it in staying true to God. It's no easy path to take, but Daniel's example is a stellar one to follow. Do you have any questions about what you heard today? If so, don't hesitate to contact us. You can get in touch with us by going to theunsafebible.com. Once there, go to the Connect tab and click on Connect Card. There, you can fill out a form for us to get in touch with you. To listen to this message or any others from this series in Daniel, just look under the Media tab at theunsafebible.com. You'll also find additional teachings in other books of the Bible. If you found this ministry to be a blessing as you've been listening, you have the opportunity to help invest in the Unsafe Bible ministry by checking out the Give tab. We're grateful for any donation given to help further the message of the gospel. That website again is theunsafebible.com. Join us again for another edition of the Unsafe Bible.